Welcome to the shop, my friends. Steve here at SKS Props, and we're getting very close to spooky season, so I thought it'd be an awesome opportunity to put out another project that you could build and customize it and really make it your own. So there's nothing really behind this that I'm basing it off of. I just wanted to do a bird skull type mask because the Plague Doctor mask that I'd made a couple years ago is extremely popular, and I kind of wanted to take that and kind of take it to the next level. So with this, you could still make this particular mask and you could make it into a Plague Doctor, or if you had a Masquerade coming up, this would be perfect for that. There's so many different things that you could do with this particular project. And if you want to make your own, of course I have free PDF files available over on my website that you can download to build right along with the video. And then when you get to a point where you're like, hey, I kind of want to do this, veer away from the video, make it your own. So this mask is of course made all out of my HD foam and foam clay, both which you can pick up over at Blick Art Materials. Because of that, it's extremely lightweight, it's easy to carve, sand, and paint. So I want to show you what it takes to put this bird skull mask together. Let's go ahead and get started. Using my prototype to create my final template, I'm going to start by taking part A and transferring that onto some 6mm foam 2 times. For the beak to go together properly, this cut along the top needs to not be straight but go inward at a 33-degree angle. This will allow the two halves to have a raised peak in the middle, otherwise it would just be rounded over. With that complete, the rest of part A can be cut out at a standard 90-degree. Always remember to resharpen your blade for clean cuts like these nostrils. To glue this together, weldwood contact cement is going to be applied to the angled cuts on part A. After the adhesive had been allowed to dry, the two halves can be firmly pressed together. And here you can see how that angled cut gave us a great peak in the middle. Part B can now be traced and cut out of some 6mm foam. This piece is glued to the underside of the beak using some superglue. Part C can now be traced and cut out of some 6mm foam 2 times. These pieces are going to make up the eyebrows, and they're going to be glued to the front of part B, but then wrap around to the underside of part A. I mark and glue this piece to the back of part A, and this is what helps the beak stick out. Part D is cut out of some 6mm foam. This piece is cut to fit and glued to the back side of part A. Now the mask is slightly rounded when these pieces are glued in, and this is going to help the mask keep its shape. For the front of the beak, I smooth out the central seam using my rotary tool. The upper section doesn't really matter because we're going to cover that seam with part E. Using some 2mm foam, part E can be traced and cut out. I mark the approximate location of this piece on the mask before I start to glue it into place. I'm just using some super glue to glue this down, but you can see how this one piece not only adds additional detail to the mask, but does a great job covering up our seams. Part F is going to make up the brow ridge, and this is going to be cut out of some 10mm foam 2 times. This piece is going to be marked and glued down, and you can see how it overlaps onto part E and goes to the corner of part A. To make up the eye bag for the front, part G is going to be traced and cut out of some 6mm foam. This piece can also be glued down, but notice how I stretch the foam to go to each corner of the eye. Part H is going to give a little more volume to the sides of the mask, and this is traced and cut out of some 6mm foam. Once the piece is marked, it can be glued to either side of the mask. Just like the pieces on the back, I slightly round the mask while I'm gluing it into place. Now I can start adding details to the mask, and I begin by marking lines that I can carve for the nostrils. Using my rotary tool, I carve lines for the nostrils and I round over all the pieces that I glued together. I'm doing this to knock down all the edges, which will give the mask a more organic look. I also give some striations to the front of the beak, and I sand down the 2 edges on either side of the back of part B. Switching over to my stone bit will now give me the opportunity to add even finer lines to the mask. The thing to keep in mind is all of the little detail lines that we're adding now are really going to pop when we add paint in the end. For additional organic details on this mask, I'm going to be using my foam clay. I wet the surface of the foam with some water, and then I add the clay to smooth out all the transitions. Usually I start off by just using my fingers pressing the foam onto the surface. After that, I'll use some additional water to help smooth the foam down, and then I'll switch over to sculpting tools to give it some more detail. Now this step isn't a necessity for this mask to be completed, so don't feel that you have to use foam clay if you don't want to. I just felt this was a fantastic opportunity to let my imagination run a little bit wild. After I'm done sculpting, I allow the foam clay to dry overnight. The foam clay is now skinned over and has become rigid enough that I can once again use my stone bit to carve into it. And I continue this process by switching over to a wire brush. To add some pits and divots to this mask, I break out my heat tool with a detail point. During this process, I very lightly touch the foam. It doesn't take hardly any pressure at all to melt the surface. With my mask complete, I can now start to paint and prime the surface, and I add a small tab to the back of the mask to help hold it while I spray it with 2 light layers of Plasti-Dip. After the Plasti-Dip had cured, I then dusted the surface with some Krylon khaki camouflage. This paint isn't sprayed on thick, just enough to lighten the color value. I apply a wash to the surface using some Liquitex Mars Black and a 1-inch mop brush. After the surface had been completely covered, I then went back with a damp paper towel and mopped up a lot of the excess paint. A hairdryer is then used to quickly dry and lock in this layer. Once again, using a mop brush, Liquitex Unbleached Titanium can then be dry brushed over the surface. Now here I don't use any water because I don't want this pigment to run down into the detail lines that I had carved into the mask earlier. I'd like a darker value difference at the bottom of the mask, so I switch over to a smaller filbert brush, but I'm still using Mars Black. This color is again used to help define the nostrils, but also to add some darker pigments around the eyes. When I get to the bottom of the mask, I'm pretty much using no water, and I'm just feathering this pigment up the beak. And I think the value change from the bottom to the top of this mask works really well, but it's your mask, paint it however you'd like. To make this mask wearable, I'm going to start by cutting 2 strips of 3/4 inch elastic, approximately 11 inches each. And like you've seen me do before, I'm going to be using some tri-glides to make this mask fully adjustable. One end of the elastic is wrapped around each tri-glide, and then the rest of the elastic is woven through the opposite tri-glide as seen in the video. Hot glue is added to secure the elastic to the mask, and then more is added on top to lock it into place. To push the mask a little bit away from the face, a small section of upholstery foam is going to be glued into the center. And with that, our custom bird skull mask is complete. So you all can see the steps that I took to put together my own bird mask. And again, this is completely customizable. So if you want to follow the video step by step, just like me, all the way to the end, you can do that, or you can just download that template, put it together, and really make it your own. And if you are building any of my builds or utilizing HD foam, be sure to tag me at SKS Props on Twitter and Instagram because I want to see your creations. Until next time, build your best with the best. HD foam.